Everybody good? Spectacular, spectacular.
Yes.
I love it. All right, so we've got some folks waiting in the waiting room. We'll let them in. While we're waiting for them to get themselves all set, here's my question for you, especially because we have a nice intimate group of people here. Tell me what would be most helpful for you, designed as reviewing the 4-page contract, the 2-page purchase agreement, and the 1-page offer to purchase form, right? All valid ways of writing up an offer and presenting it to a listing agent. Is there a consensus on where you might want to start on that? Are there questions that you want to put on the table before we get into each of the forms specifically? Again, I'll make this as specific to you as you want it to be, or I can just pick a form and start going through it.
The escalation, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No, you go, please. Thank you.
Maria and then Chris.
The escalation clause for me will be, do I need to add that form that is on the Keller Williams and the command, or a contingency? And cash offers.
Okay, and so escalation clauses are not built. Sorry, I was turning away from the mic. Escalation clauses are not built into any of those 3 forms, and so if you're utilizing an escalation clause, you will need to either write it in to any of those 3 forms, or we do have a short template that's in the Command and DocuSign libraries, so you can use either one. Is that the question, Maria, or is a discussion about the escalation clause what you're looking for?
No, that was the question, because I saw that template that you're talking about, and I used it in the contingencies area. I added the escalation clause. So then I saw that template, and I was wondering, do I have to use it, or okay.
Yeah, no, you can do either or. You can write it in as you did, and or use the document. There are just some people who are looking for more of a fill in the blank rather than a write it in. So we kind of gave you the option of both.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome. What else? Any other kind of specific questions before we dive into forms?
I was just going to say, I've been seeing a lot of agents on the MLS requesting the 4-page form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's talk about that real quick, because for those of you who are Fairfield County based agents, it is my opinion that the time of our kind of wussier little forms, the 1-pager that we use up north in the greater Danbury area, the 1-page offer to purchase, and the 2-pager that we use mostly along the coast, I think the days are numbered on those documents. I think more and more what the last 12 months has shown Fairfield County agents is that there's a different way to do business that might, I'm not going to say better or worse, because there are pros and cons, right, to all of those documents. And yet certainly when the market is moving a little more swiftly, there's a little bit more, I struggle to use the word certainty as well, but I'll use it for lack of a better term, a little more certainty with that document, right? The 4-pager. So I think what we're going to do is kind of just pivot and start with that document, and then we'll work backwards in terms of the teeth that the documents that we're talking about have, because certainly the 4-page document, the 4-page standard contract does have the most teeth. Second would be the 2-pager, and then the 1-page offer to purchase has no teeth whatsoever. That document is not chewing steak anytime soon, because there just ain't no teeth there, right? So I will jump to that form. However, any other questions before we move to that form? Yes, Donna.
I actually wrote up an offer yesterday, and I was looking for an appraisal rider, but I couldn't find one, so I did just write it in, that it's contingent upon. Is there a rider somewhere?
There might be in the forms library. Our forms library is kind of it's a mishmash of lots of different board and former MLS libraries combined with all of our documents, right? And what's interesting is that as we've expanded eastward, right, to encompass people like you who are really more used to doing bit from a forms perspective, you're used to more of the there's a form for everything version, right? And again, the Fairfield County version of that is you just write it in, right? Or you just send an email, you just have a quick conversation. And so one by one, we're building, and as the last 12 months has shown us, when more and more people are traveling further and there's a crisscross of in Fairfield County and outside of Fairfield County means of doing business, there's a conversation then that gets had about, right, well, isn't there a form for that? Or the agent on the other side is asking me for a form for that, right? Termination of cancellation of contract, the rescission of contract document is another perfect example of that. And until about a year ago, I didn't even know what it was. Until so and Donna hears that doing business in and around Southbury for her career, it's like that's a standard form that we use all the time, right? And I'm not kidding, just transparently, I'd never even heard of it until about a year ago when someone said, a listing agent's asking me for this, what is that? I'm like, I don't know, can you ask for an example, right? And so slowly but surely, our library has expanded as we've done more and more business outside of what typically is a relatively insulated county of business, to address some of the, I wouldn't say shortcomings, well, I will say shortcomings, some of the shortcomings perhaps of how we've done business in Fairfield County for a really long time, which is just a little bit more casual, right? Did that answer that, Donna?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So whether that form exists in our library or not right this very minute, I don't know the answer to it. And if it doesn't, if you're ever missing a document that you think is important to be in our library, just make sure it gets emailed either to Deb Linke or to Sam Lopez, and say, we really need this. If it could be formatted and added, and they'll take care of getting that in there. Anything else before we start on the 4-page contract? No? All righty. Well, then let me bring that up on my screen. For those of you who don't know the contract I'm speaking of, oh, well, it's always helpful when the MLS decides to boot you out because you haven't done anything for a couple of minutes. Let's get back in there. Hold on a second, please. Please hold. Here we go. Almost there. 77 different places too. Okay, so I wanted to show you where I'm getting this from. So if you click on, okay, so on your screen, you should see, this is the forms section of the SmartMLS, right? And so when you click on SmartMLS Forms, either from the home page or from one of the quick links at the bottom of the when you're actually in like a search criteria, if you scroll to the excuse me, when you're out, well, you know what, let me just show you, hold on. Let me stop my share and just go from. Okay, so when you're here at the bottom, somewhere on you have some quick links, SmartMLS resources, SmartMLS Forms is ultimately where you go to find that. And if you're more on the home page, did that change for you? It did, so you're now seeing like Matrix, Showing Time, Home Snap. Okay, so from here, you can also scroll down to the bottom and those same links appear here, and you can go to SmartMLS Forms right at the bottom there. So either place you can click and get to this forms library. On the right-hand side, you'll see listing and sales agreements, see all 11 articles. That's what you need to click in order to have both a purchase agreement as well as a standard form contract pop up from the MLS. So the standard form contract is the one that we're going to spend a little bit of time on today. And if you click that link and then it says click form to download. So you'll just click on the actual form. It will then download and you can open it in a PDF, which is fillable. So here is, let's see if I can get rid of this on this side. No, I can't. That's just what it is. You know what? I'll move you over there. There we go. Okay. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with this document, this is a real estate contract, right? And so for those of you who are used to writing an offer to purchase and then having it be replaced with a contract, or writing a purchase agreement and having it be replaced with a contract that attorneys write, this, for all intents and purposes, kind of serves both purposes, right? There are some attorneys still today that, even though you've signed this, do like to replace it with their own. That's going to be determined by the attorneys involved in the transaction. Mostly the listing, the seller's attorney will determine whether or not something needs to be rewritten or not. I will tell you that my experience with this document is more from my investment property purchases, which happen outside of the county, versus my real estate experience, which happened mostly inside of the county. And so I was very rarely asked whether or not a new version of this should go out, right? So when I'm buying a property in Waterbury, I just fill this out, everybody signs it, it is the contract, right? We don't have to go through the process of having somebody write something additional. That being said, you need to be, clear that you understand what this is, right? You're not practicing law, even though especially Fairfield County attorneys will look down their nose saying you should not be using this because this is a legal document. It was designed to assist you in moving a real estate transaction along by giving you just kind of a simple fill in the blank. It doesn't ask you to interpret legal language or legal doctrine. It just simply asks you to fill in some of the key pieces of info and outline the transaction. That being said, you just need to be cautious because, again, when everybody signs this, it is a legally binding document. So, which it says right at the top there, right? Notice, this contract constitutes a legally binding contract for the purchase and sale of residential property, right? So it kind of gives you a fair warning right across the top there. You should get an attorney. If you don't have one, please find one, right? Because anything that comes from this will then need to be interpreted by someone who understands the law. So the first portion of this is very similar to either the purchase agreement or the offer to purchase document that you may be more used to, right? And that is, you're going to list the sellers and the buyers, the address of the property that is being purchased, have a discussion around any personal property that is either included or excluded. And that's the first number of lines that you see on your screen, right? The seller, so whoever owns the property, and their current address. That may be the address they're selling. It may not be if they're not owner occupants. The name or names of the buyers and their current address. Again, number 3 is the real property address. So that's the subject property. If they're buying 123 Main Street, that's where that goes. 123 Main Street goes right in there, so that we're identifying the property that is being purchased. And then number 4 goes on to talk about what, if any, personal property are going to be included or specifically excluded from the transaction. Let's spend just a minute of time on number 4. For the most part, if you are utilizing this document in conjunction with an MLS listed property, I find it a powerful tool to write in here under personal property. I can do it because I can just type while we're talking. As per MLS number 170466758. Right, and so now you're taking the MLS listing and incorporating it into the contract So any personal property that's listed in that MLS document becomes a part of this real estate contract without having to list every single thing all over again. Right. So I find that to be a helpful way to tackle personal property. However, at the same time, I like to be clear about the big ticket items. And so for me, it was always as per that MLS number, including the refrigerator, the range, the washer, the dryer, right? So for me, big ticket items like appliances and things that you just want to make sure everyone has clarity around, I always list them separately as well. For my own purchases to this day, I do the exact same thing. So as per the MLS number, so that everything gets kind of sucked on in. And so, if there's an argument about a ceiling fan, all right, so zippity doo on a ceiling fan. But if it's the $2,500 Sub-Zero refrigerator, right, that we're unclear about, that's a different conversation than a ceiling fan that is easily replaced at Home Depot, right? So, so any larger ticket items, I like to just list them separately, even though it's redundant, because those items are typically listed on the MLS listing anyway. But if it's a bigger ticket item, I'm going to put them here as well. Yes, Chris.
So I'm under the impression, or where I come from anyway, if it's attached, it stays with the house, meaning if it's screwed in like a ceiling fan or light fixture, but if it's just plugged in like a washer, dryer, refrigerator, that's personal property and should be added to the contract. Is it the same?
Yes, I would say it's exactly the same. Fixtures are going to be those things that are affixed to the property, right? So a ceiling fan, even though there is a spot to list ceiling fans, right, in the on the MLS listing, ceiling fans are typically left. Now, I say typically simply because I don't know. I think if you do this job long enough, you kind of see.
Well, I've seen them replaced with lesser quality.
Yeah, exactly. And
Closing.
so from a seller's perspective, as a listing agent, my conversation listing a property was, look, if there's anything in the house that you're taking with you, including things that might be affixed to the house, like a chandelier, like maybe it's a ceiling fan to end all ceiling fans, who knows? Let's do this. Go to the store, buy a reasonable replacement, and take down what you are looking to take with you, and put the new one up prior to showing the property. Because what happened, I've seen people fall in love with the dining room chandelier as well as the house around it. And as soon as they recognized that the dining room chandelier was not conveying with the property, the rest of the house around it didn't seem quite as attractive, right? So we don't want distractions in terms of things that are included or excluded. So I like that as a rule of thumb. Yes, Donna.
Can't you also put, we use an inclusion exclusion form up here. Do you use that as well? Can't you put as per inclusion exclusion attached?
Yeah, 100%. So if there is an inclusion exclusion form, which not everyone uses, I personally think it creates lots and lots of clarity, right? There's just big long lists of what stays, what goes, and then at the bottom, if anything that doesn't have a little checkbox, you get to list out at the bottom. There's far more room to be far clearer than just writing on these couple of lines. And so if there is one as part of the listing, you can simply say as per that inclusion exclusion addendum. If there's not, as a buyer's agent, you could always ask the sellers to complete one and send one over to the listing agent if you so chose, or do it this way. So a couple of different ways to accomplish making sure that we have clarity around inclusions and exclusions. And of course, that last line there is the exclusion line. So if there's something that you specifically want to be certain they remove, when I buy properties, my exclusion line is always all personal property, including building materials and debris in attics, basements, garages. Again, I'm buying investment properties, and sometimes previous landlords think, well, you know what? Some previous tenant shoved all their crap in the basement or up into the attic, and he doesn't say anything, I don't want to have to pay for the removal of that. So can you tell I've already inherited homes with a whole ton of crap someplace and had to pay for its removal, right? So those kinds of things, if you're thinking about, I one time represented a property, was selling a property to buyers that had an anvil, like an old-fashioned anvil anchored into the concrete floor in the garage, right in the middle. I don't know if they were shoeing horses, that I don't know what it was for, but you couldn't pull a car in. So we specifically asked for that to be excluded from the sale, because removing that and getting rid of it would have been a expensive and perhaps a little bit of a nightmare. But that's how you use those lines, included and excluded. Questions on any of that? All right. So moving forward, you have number 5 is the purchase price, right? And so purchase price breaks down kind of like this. And this document's a little bit different than the purchase agreement and the offer to purchase, because the total purchase price is last. On the other 2 forms, you start with the total and then break down the total. On this form, you start with the broken down pieces and it will auto-populate the total purchase price at the bottom, right? And so in letter A, line A, the initial deposit is oftentimes 1%. It doesn't have to be, it can be more, it can be less. However, for, let's just say, a $500,000 house, if you're doing that 1%, that's a $5,000 initial deposit. Right, line B, the additional deposit, which is putting down the rest of the money that you're using as your down payment. And so perhaps in this scenario, it's, let's say it's an 80-10-10 financing, right? So there's 10% down, there's 80% as the mortgage, and an additional 10% that comes in cash at the closing. So in that scenario, if you have 1% being put down as the initial deposit, the other 9%, let's just say that's going to, be 2 weeks later, just for giggles. So that's the 22nd of November. You have the additional 9% or $45,000 in this case, and then proceeds by a bank or some kind of a loan, right? So then line C is the mortgage amount. So in a $500,000 property, if 80% is being financed, you have $400,000 here in that line, which is the loan. And then the balance is going to be the extra 10%, right? So this is just, again, an example of 80-10-10 financing with a $500,000 purchase price. So $50,000 goes in there, and you can see as I wrote those in, the total purchase price auto-populates by adding those 4 lines on top of it together, and gives you your offer price of $500,000. Any questions on that breakdown? It's pretty clear, right?
Me.
Yes.
I
Yes,
have a
Donna.
question. So where I am, I used to be in Fairfield County, so I was always used to the bigger deposits. Literally, we do $1,000 for the first one, no matter how much the purchase price is. I mean, it can be more if you're trying to impress, but, and then maybe 5%, 10%, whatever. But it's so funny how, is that like, is 1% like a standard in Fairfield County? It is.
It pretty much
okay.
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it pretty much is as a standard. Yeah. And so
Okay.
remember the idea of it's just as valid if you were to write it this way. So $1,000 down with an extra 49, or if this is only 5%, right? So 5% is going to be with an extra 4% here. Oh, sorry, that's 1,000. So 5% of 550 is going to be $25,000. What did I do wrong? Oh, well, there you go. So 5% is $25,000, right? With a $1,000 down payment. So the money that the way Donna just described it is we put $1,000 down with a total of 5%. Well, then you either need to bring more money to the closing or finance more, right? So that you'll make that up here without changing the financing. You'd have $75,000 additional money that you're bringing to the closing table. The good news is that it doesn't really matter how you structure it, right? It's okay. We're not talking about the law here. We're talking about reasonable and customary. And what's reasonable and customary in the locale that you're practicing in is what I encourage you to do, simply because when you go outside of what is reasonable and customary and present an offer to a listing agent who's expecting it to be the way it's reasonable and customary there, it could kind of throw them for a loop. Right, for a $500,000 house in Fairfield County, if I was the listing agent and I saw $1,000, I would instantaneously, now I'd ask some more questions, but I'd instantaneously start to think, maybe this isn't a very powerful buyer. Maybe this is a weak buyer. There's not a whole lot of money going on here, right? And you've all heard me say, when I buy properties for myself, I write checks for $10,000 down. For 10% down, right? And so the idea of the condo I bought my grandmother a couple of weeks ago, it was a $315,000 condo. That 1%, that initial down payment in that scenario for me was $31,500, because I wanted to send a message that there was money behind this transaction, because I wanted to show strength. So again, it's all a matter of strategy. It's all a matter of discussing it with the buyers. There's not a law about how it goes down. There's just kind of reasonable and customary. Yes, Chris.
On line B, can that number be 0?
It can be. So for me, with my grandmother's condo, it was 31.5 as 10%, and then just the rest of it was going to be cash at closing. So for me, it was 31.500. And then whatever the math worked out to be to close that out, right? So yes, any of those lines can be 0 if that's the structure of the transaction that the buyer is looking to present. Make sense? Okay, so in this case, we have a $400,000 mortgage on line C, right? And so we're going to go down now to line number 6, which is the contingency. And so the mortgage loan amount in 6A is going to be restated here at $400,000, which is not that, $400,000. I think that's that, yeah. You'll stick in there, it's a 30-year loan unless it's not, and then pop in whatever else is. Notice it says at prevailing interest rates, so there's no contingency for a specific interest rate in this contract. In some contracts there are, in this one there's not. It's just whatever the prevailing interest rate is, which means if someone has to take out a 4% loan instead of 3.5%, it's not a contingency in the contract that says I can only obtain 4%, therefore I don't want to buy this house. Right? That's what an interest rate contingency would look like. In this one, it just says prevailing, so that pretty much covers whatever is out there in the market. And then, of course, you need a written loan commitment by a certain date, and that date goes here in line C. What I encourage you to do is simply speak to the loan officer involved and get some guidance as to what they think makes sense here, right? You don't want to overpromise. You also don't want to make it seem like, we're going to take 3 months to get a loan, because sellers are going to look to have it be quick, but also reasonable. Right. And so for me, the commitment, that's still, I'm push for 30 days on that. If the loan officer says, look, this is a specialty program that the buyers are entering, and we're just going to need more time, well, then maybe push that to 40 days or so, see what kind of time frame makes sense for the loan officer. But I like a kind of an average of 30 days in here. It's tough nowadays, especially with a scarcity of appraisers to make loan commitments happen in less than 30. So you just put in, if it's 11/8, you could put in there 12/8/21 or whatever that date might be. You can also do things like, you don't necessarily have to put a date in here. You can say things like 30 days from fully executed contract. It gets very tiny, itty bitty, right? But you can do that, because sometimes it takes a couple of days to negotiate the contract and then have everybody sign. So if you're concerned about losing time, you could always make it contingent or make the clock start counting from a certain action, and that could be full execution of the contract. Make sense?
Hey, Rick, I had a quick question.
Yes.
Wondering, the little box on top where it says third party mortgage or purchase money mortgage, what's the difference between the two?
Third-party mortgage is what most people obtain. That's where there's a a lender on the outside. Purchase money mortgage is going to be seller financing, generally speaking. So if the seller themselves are financing it, you would check that. It happens every once in a long while, but it's not typical. Typically, you're obtaining a third-party mortgage. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Sure. And then, of course, the closing date, right? That's going to be a conversation that you have with the seller. So whatever that might be, right? So you're going to close on Christmas this time, because who has anything better to do on Christmas, right? So we'll have a closing date in there, and then you're typically going to just fill in the closing date of one of the attorneys. It's hardly ever at the mortgage lender's office. This is a kind of a dorkily written contract, because that just typically doesn't happen. So I typically use either the county that the property is located in or the county that the seller's attorney is located in. There's not one closing anymore anyway. There's usually two closings where the buyers will close in one place and the sellers will close in another place, and the attorneys just pass the documentation. So it's really not all that important as to what you put in there. And then, of course, on page 2, you're going to put the date so that everything is dated the same. Oops, not there. That's the buyer's initials. You want to come down here to the top of page 2. There we go. And put in the date. And then for the property known as 123 Main Street. And so this will auto-populate. I should do that just so you see it. When you put in the real property address here, 123 Main Street, Ridgefield, right? So when you put in line number 3, it will auto-populate down here on the top of each of these pages. So you don't have to worry about filling that in each time. If you're going to make if the buyer is looking to make the inspections a contingency, you will fill in this date, right? The inspections checked below should be completed no later than X. You'll kind of pick the inspections that are going to be done, right? So in this case, it's building, septic, and title and radon. Those are the ones that are going to be done. Me personally, again, you can make a choice about for yourself if you want to do this. I don't check the waived, because I just say yes what we're doing, just in case the buyer all of a sudden wakes up 2 days later and says, oh, you know what, I think we better do a lead test, and is dead set on doing some lead test. Well, now you haven't waived it per se, you just didn't check the yes. I think it's just easier to kind of add things later on if you don't specifically waive. So I check for myself, I check the things I'm going to do and I leave the other ones blank. Again, whether an attorney would agree with me about adding things in at a later date, just because it's open well, I can pretty much tell you they wouldn't agree with me. And yet I have found that it does open me to having at least a secondary conversation if I need it. So again, that's just me. And then the date that goes in there, the inspection completion date. Right now, the way the market is moving, I'll tell you what I do. When I'm ready to make an offer, I call my inspector. I get a date 24 to 48 hours in the future, and then solidify that date, put that date in there as the outside, and then make sure that the listing agent knows that the inspection's already scheduled. I don't wait for a yes to schedule my inspection and give myself a week to try and schedule it. I'd rather, so those are those things that you learn in a really fast-paced market that I personally believe should follow us out of this market. And as the market starts to shift and slow a bit, just stay that way, because I think it's a best practice. Just know the inspection date, have it clear going in, so that you can send the message to the seller that, again, you know what you're doing, there's strength in your offer, and you're not going to allow their property to stay off the market without a solid commitment from you for any longer than has to be. So Again, for me, it's usually 24 to 48 hours from the day I'm submitting the offer that I have the inspector say, yes, I can see you tomorrow at 3. Just give me a thumbs up and confirm, so that when I'm going and presenting this, I can then just let people know that. Yes, Chris.
I've checked them all, and whether we did it or not was at least we had the option to. The other thing I see here is title search. The attorneys do that, so that's going to fall outside the date for the inspection.
It is. And so if you look at the top, it actually gives you the title search completion date shall be no later than 10 business days after the inspection completion date. Generally speaking, the title is going to happen. It happens later than that anyway, right? And again, there are some attorneys who will make an adjustment in that. And there are, again, most attorneys who will look at that and say, okay, well, that's just not how we do it. And they don't make a big deal out of the date. And so the other thing you could do, if you were concerned about it, or the buyers were concerned about it, is you could change that 10 business days to 30 business days after the inspection completion date. Or you could say title search completion date shall be no later than 10 business days prior to close. You can change the last piece of the of that piece. I will personally, I don't. I never touch that, because I just know the attorneys are going to work out the title on the tail end. And the only reason I personally don't check everything nowadays is that I want to appear as strong as possible. And so when I'm sending something in, I don't want the seller to look at that and say, oh man, like this dude's going to do like 900 different inspections and be nickel and diming me for all of it. I'd rather focus in on the things that I know are important to me, and leave the rest of it assumed that I'm simply not doing that. But again, that's just me. There's no right or wrong here. There's just kind of different paths to go down. Number 10 is the property condition disclosure report. It basically just says that the seller is going to furnish one or pay $500 at closing. The buyer just initials that so that they understand that that's the way the law is written. And number 11 is lead. The buyer acknowledges receipt of the lead disclosure form as required by law. So 2 initials go in there. And then, of course, the statement regarding lead-based paint, which goes along with 11, which says that any residential dwelling unit constructed prior to 1978 likely have lead, and goes on to say, you know, the sellers have a federal obligation to disclose what they know about that lead. That doesn't mean that if they didn't actually do a test, right? When I lived in Stamford, I lived in a 1920s colonial, right? And when I sold it, the buyers said, well, we're going to do they were relocation buyers. And so they weren't paying for anything. So they decided to do every test imaginable to mankind, right? Including one of those XRF tests for lead paint. And I said to them, look, it's a 1920, I can't say this on my federal disclosure because I never did a test myself. So I don't know for certain that there's lead paint here, but the house was built in 1920. And all anyone who's lived here has ever done is paint over it. So somewhere, if you dig down deep enough, there's lead paint because it was built in 1920. So when you go ahead and do your fancy expensive test, but when you come back to me and say, look, there's lead paint all over the place, I'm going to tell you, I know I told you that. Do you want to buy the house or not? Because I'm not giving you a dime to take care of it. Well, guess what happened? They came back and they said, oh man, they found lead all over. Oh, you're kidding. What a shocker. You want to buy the house or not? Well, you're going to mitigate it? Nope. Well, I guess we want to buy it anyway. Okay, good. So what a waste of conversation this has all been, right? Because I already told you that was how it was going to go down. Just know that that's kind of the whole idea of lead, and it outlines that for you in paragraph 11. Number 12, possession and occupancy, right? So possession and occupancy, the buyer shall have exclusive possession and occupancy of the property and broom clean. This is where the broom clean thing comes in. And shall convey via warranty deed. The number 12 is pretty much just attorney speak for this is how we expect to convey the property, and it needs to be cleaned. Number 13, additional paragraphs. Notice it says unless crossed out, the following paragraphs 16 through 29 are automatically made a part of the contract. That's what 13 says. 14 goes on to say additional terms and seller concessions. Things can go in there, like if you're writing an appraisal contingency, right? Transaction or offer contingent upon property appraising at or above the agreed upon sale price. Or if you have an escalation clause, you could write it in here. Those kinds of things. Yes, Chris.
Is this where you put a seller to replace carpet or give a carpet allowance?
Yes, if that's what's agreed to. So if there's some kind of a credit to be given, you would list that here. Yes. Or if in fact it's in an addendum or a rider, you could list it in 15 right underneath that, right? And then have it reference another document. So you could do it either way. To me, 14 and 15 is where we get to kind of explain some stuff that maybe we've been talking with the other side about, and there's been some agreement to X, Y, or Z. 14 and 15, we can kind of use those lines to explain anything that's outside of the basic terms of the basic contract. You know what? Let me go back because I forgot one important piece. Paragraph 8. This is what makes this document different, right? Paragraph 8, because frankly, all the rest of it is standard attorney speak that you don't really do much with, right? And so I'll show you what that looks like, but we're kind of through most of the fill in the blank stuff at this point. Paragraph 8, I skipped, however, and paragraph 8's important because it is unique to this document. Paragraph 8 says attorney's review period. This contract is subject to review by the attorneys representing both the buyer and the seller. And based upon their review, the attorneys, either party may cancel the contract by giving written notice 5 business days after the party receives a fully executed contract. Right? So what that means is anyone can change their mind for any reason within 5 business days. That's the attorney review period. And if you notice, it says upon cancellation, if someone were to do that and follow those rules, the deposit shall be returned to the buyer. So nobody's money is at risk within that 5 business day period of review. Now, I do know that there are some agents during the real height of craziness in the last 12 months had reduced that number from 5 down to 2 or 3 business days, right? To still give the attorneys an opportunity to check out the contract, but limit the exposure so that everyone had to be on board with each other faster. Any questions about the attorney review period? Okay, so just remember that in a purchase agreement or in an offer to purchase, that doesn't exist. It just basically says it'll go to the attorneys, but there is no actual review period built into that unless you write it in the 4-page contract. There is that, right? I can tell you how I use the 5-day attorney review period because I have my inspections like within 24 hours after a fully executed contract. I'm for strength purposes, I don't make my contracts contingent upon the inspections. I reserve the right to do them, but I don't make the contract contingent upon it. So I can do them, but if I find something horrible and terrible, I have no right to exit the contract based on my discovery because the contract is not contingent upon inspections, which makes me just a stronger buyer. What people forget about is because my inspections are being done on the 1st or 2nd business day after a full execution of the contract, if the inspector finds something, I'm still within my 5-day attorney review period. So I can still move out of the contract based on what's found during inspections because I'm still within that 5-day attorney review period. That makes sense? So it's just a little bit of a legal cheat to say, yep, nothing's contingent upon the inspections. And then if something happens during the inspections, because I'm getting them done so quickly, I can always have my attorney utilize this paragraph 8 if I really want out. Make sense? Cool. 16 talks about the deed. Again, I would not be changing any of this, right? 17 is about condition of the premises, about as is conveyance, and how everything needs to kind of look at the day of the closing, which basically is the same as when you inspected the property last. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this stuff because, frankly, you shouldn't be changing any of this anyway, because you don't have a law degree, right? When you start tinkering around with 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, all of those things, you're really dealing in contractual language that you probably shouldn't be playing around in. So most of the rest of this contract is going to be reserved for the attorneys to adapt or revise if necessary. I would encourage you not to get involved in that. And then 29 is the buyers and sellers information, including the buyers and sellers, agents and attorneys, like their reps information, listing agent, buyer's agent, and then the attorneys for both with all that information. And then at the very bottom of page 4, the buyers and the sellers go ahead and sign their names. Make sense? Questions, comments, concerns on the 4-page contract?
Hey, Rick, I got a quick question.
Yes, John.
So you guys mentioned the word riders a couple times throughout the Zoom call. I was wondering what's a rider? What does that mean?
So generally speaking, oftentimes when an attorney writes a contract, the seller's attorney will write the contracts. If we're not using a standard form contract like this, the seller's attorney writes the contract and sends that off to the buyer's attorney for review. Most attorneys for buyers have their standard buyer side rider. So because the contract is written by the listing agents, by the seller's attorney, the buyer side wants their say in the contract as well. And so instead of adapting or changing the actual contract, they just stick a rider. It's like an addendum. It's a secondary piece of the contract that is made a part of the contract by language that is written inside of the contract. When people are using the standard form real estate contract, as we just reviewed, if there's anything that this is missing, sometimes buyers, attorneys, even though they're using this standard form real estate contract, do have their version of, I'm going to put my buyer rider onto this contract. Sometimes sellers attorneys, knowing that this is a standard contract, have a version of, they have 4 or 5 or 19, whatever bullet points that they want to make sure get into the contract. And so they may attach a rider. So all a rider is it's an extra part of the contract that is made a part of the contract by everyone's execution. Make sense?
Yeah.
Donald.
I just wanted to say that I also found this form. I never even knew you could get forms off of MLS. So it is in command under the KW 471 standard form. So that's where I got it yesterday.
Yes, yeah. So it does exist in both market centers, command and DocuSign libraries, and it also exists right in the MLS as well. So if you get 3 different places, you can locate it. Excellent. Any other questions on the 4-pager?
I had a quick question.
Yes.
More from the standpoint, you mentioned about the inspection, like you usually line them up in 2 days, and obviously the contract says 5 days to cancel. I'm just curious, in working with inspectors, and especially with the market the way it was it, if you don't have necessarily, someone coming new into it, did you find that did the inspectors cancel on you once you have the appointment, or should there be a worry about that? Because you talk, like, if you say it's not contingent on the inspection, and then I line up something with the inspector for 2 days, and then all of a sudden he doesn't show up that second day, or I'm just curious, like, is that?
It's not something I ever dealt with. I imagine if there were really some, maybe got sick or something like that, but no, I wouldn't. I would use people who you trust and or who your colleagues trust. If you don't have those relationships yet, I would absolutely use people that your colleagues do, because then they're held accountable to future business and those relationships.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a supply and demand issue in the case of the housing market being crazy, but it sounds like there's plenty of factors.
And the answer is, to answer Ronnie, is yes. I mean, certainly during the height of the craziness, it could have been difficult to find inspectors who had availability, right? And so sometimes that 24 to 48 hour thing wasn't working so well, or you have to kind of move through and say, okay, well, if this person's not available and this person's not available, who can I get that is available so that I have that lined up? For me, that, you know, I rely on those relationships to say, okay, it's me. So if you cancel somebody else, I'm okay with that, as long as we can have our appointment tomorrow, right? So again, leverage those relationships, because it's crazy important for your clients. I think that's one of the most overlooked tools to having your offers accepted, and that is to have a pre-scheduled inspection within 24 to 48 hours of when you're actually producing the offer. Because now I just get to say to Donna, look, Donna, all we need is a yes. And we will show up at 12 noon tomorrow. The inspections will be done. You'll know whether or not there's anything to worry about by 7 o'clock tomorrow night, and zippity doo dah. Like the sellers are like, wow, that's very appealing to me, because I don't want my property off the market for a week, only to find out that somebody doesn't want to buy it because there's a rotten piece of wood on the deck, right? So it relieves the seller of that fear of removing it from the market, only to have to put it back on. Anybody else?
Hey, Rick, another quick question. Are any of the contracts on Command different from the ones that are available on the SmartMLS?
Are they different? Is that what the question is?
Yeah, I was asking, is there any difference between any of them?
There might be small differences. I won't say no, but if there are, they're tiny little differences. For the most part, they are the same forms, just formatted into Command. Again, there may be some small differences, but for the most part, they're either exact or pretty close.
All right, thanks.
Sure. Frank.
And this document printed up, signed by the buyer, and then physically delivered to the seller's agent? Or is it easier to just do DocuSign these days, or what's the preference or standard?
Yeah, so I think that depends on you, and it depends on your clients, right? For me, it's electronic signatures, and it just hastens everything along. It just makes everything go quicker, and it's more efficient. If you struggle with that, or if you struggle with that, what I encourage is learn it, because it is the way the business is being done, right? If your clients struggle with it, there are some buyers who say, you know what, I don't have a computer, or I can't do it on my phone, or whatever they might say. If they struggle with it, there's no harm in printing it out and having a physical signature. But then I would scan it and email it off to the listing agent with a follow-up phone call and a text saying, hey, just sent that. Can you confirm receipt? When am I going to hear back?
And I'm sorry, if I could just continue it. If I do, or if one does, then email it to the listing agent, gets it back by PDF, then upload it for the market center, right? Upload it into Command for the market center.
Yeah, once you have an accepted offer, this document, whichever document you've used, one of the three, and all the supporting documentation, then yes, either gets sent to the concierge folks to upload, or you upload that directly into your own Command and submit to the MCA. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else on this document? All right, so I'm going to switch over to the purchase agreement. And these are going to go far quicker, because you'll see there's just less, right? It's not a 4-page contract. It's just a 2-page little purchase agreement, which is really looks more like an outline, right? It's like an agreement to agree. And so you have the same information as in that first document that we saw, It's an agreement between the sellers and their address and the buyers and their address to convey the property known and described as 123 Main Street, right? So that's where the subject property goes, and then inclusions and exclusions. So the first number of lines, the exact same information as on the standard page, standard form 4-page contract. The terms and conditions of the sale, this is a little bit different. If you remember, I said it's just a little backwards. The standard form contract has you break it down and tallies it up at the end. In this form, number 1 here, the price is the total. So you start with the $500,000 and then you break it down the same way as we did on the other document. So line 1 would be the total offer of $500,000. Line 2, cash as a binder, is either that 1% or the $1,000, whatever it is customary where you're doing business. Line 3 is the additional down payment, right? So if you're putting down 1% on line 2 and you're putting down a total of 10%, well, then line 3 would be that 9%, right? Because you have 1% on line 2, an additional 9 on line 3, which now has a total down payment of 10% of the $500,000. Line 4, so this is flipped. Line 4 is now the additional cash you might bring to the closing table. So using the same example as our last one, this would be the other $50,000, because lines 2 and 3 together would be 50,000 and line 4 would be 50,000. I type it in here, but this is not fillable, so I can't type it for you. And then the last line, line 5, is the mortgage. So that's where the $400,000 pops in.
Rick,
Yeah.
question. If I'm submitting a cash offer, do I only fill in where it says the last one, 1, 2, 3, the fourth one? That will be my total, not only, the 10% plus the rest of the money on closing date, correct?
Yeah. So if that's how it's being written up, if you're putting 10% down immediately, well, then 10% would go on line 2, right? So 500,000 on line 1, 50,000 or 10% on line 2, and then nothing on line 3, and then $450,000 cash on line 4 and 0 on line 5.
0 on line.
The other way to write that is $500,000 on line 1, 1% down, like the binder, 1%, so $5,000, and then on line 2, $45,000 on line 3. So they put the rest of the 10% down when they sign the contract. So now you have your 50,000 spread out over lines 2 and 3, but it's still 450 on line 4 and 0 on line 5.
Okay. Great.
Make sense?
Thanks.
Sure.
Yes.
And then the other thing on line 4, notice at the end of that, it says cash on taking title to premises on blank. So the closing date that's where the closing date on this document goes. And then in the mortgage contingency, if there is a mortgage, you have to say whether it is or is not contingent, right? Can people obtain mortgages for a property and not make it contingent? Yes, right, absolutely. So remember, just like can they do inspections on a property and have the inspections not be contingent? Yes. Sometimes I think people get confused that when they say they're waiving the contingency for something, that they think they're waiving the whole experience. Waiving your inspections and waiving a contingency for inspection, 2 different things. Waiving a mortgage, that means you're paying cash, right? Because there is no mortgage. Waiving the contingency for a mortgage and still obtaining a mortgage is different, right? When I bought this last condo from my grandmother, I offered cash, and about 2 weeks in, after I'd been talking to my financing people, said, okay, so here's the deal. I still have the cash. If for whatever reason, the financing takes longer than you want to close, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I'll just pay cash because I showed you proof of funds. I have the cash. It's still a cash offer. However, it's far simpler and less money for me to do the financing as a purchase than wait until afterwards and do delayed financing. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to get started on the process. The only thing I'll need from you is to let the appraiser in when the appraisal has to be done. Other than that, bing, bam, boom, I now have a fully approved mortgage on a cash offer. So I'm still obtaining a mortgage, but it was never contingent. And the seller saw that I had the cash sitting in the bank in case something went wrong, that I could and was willing to use the cash to close when they wanted to close. Because part of the reason they said yes to me was I said, well, I'll close whenever you want. You want to close fast? I'll do that. You want to close? You want longer? Whatever you want, you tell me. You see the difference there between those two things, contingent upon and waived entirely? Okay, good. I'm going to just assume that you are all thrilled with that news.
Rick, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I notice on this contract, the binder is, you don't have an option. It's not the seller's attorneys or buyer's attorneys. It's Keller Williams Realty.
Yes.
On line
so-
2, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And so these documents are, so this comes from, yeah, this is the standard MLS purchase agreement modified with our logo on it and that one line. And as many of you know, about a year ago, we went away from actually writing trustee checks to the company. They now go to the buyer's attorney. So noted. Purchase agreement. Change trustee line. Yes, that has to be updated. Thank you for pointing that out.
So will you update it with just a blank line so we could put whatever we want in there? Okay, great.
Yeah, there'll just be a blank line such that, and in the interim, this form exists on the MLS with a blank line there. Again, we customized the one from the MLS so that you didn't have to keep filling in Keller Williams Realty trustee, which now I see is outdated. So you can always, in the meantime, I'll have that fixed while I'm away. In the interim, if you want something with just a blank line, you can grab it from the MLS. Contingencies here are, again, done similarly, just a little different. You've got some check boxes for inspections to be completed by a certain date at the bottom there. Not in love with the way this form is written or reads, and yet again, it is what it is. And then any other contingencies can be written in on those lines under the word contingencies, right? So you have the inspection boxes underneath, the completion date of the inspections by that certain date in that last checkbox in the lower right-hand corner, and then any other contingencies like those lines. I think it were 14 and 15 or 15 and 16 in the standard 4-page contract. These lines here are where you'd write in things like appraisal contingencies or things like that. And then you have just a couple more paragraphs. This is either a yes or a no, that the buyer has received the property condition disclosure report. So if they've received it, they check yes, and if not, they check no. Right, that's all that has to be done there, but it's the same discussion about they either get it or they get $500 at closing. And clearly this needs to be updated because this says $300 at closing. My goodness, maybe I was sent the wrong form because I'm pretty certain that we
I was
had.
gonna say, glad you had the class.
That might have been me because I went into my computer and grabbed these that I use as examples for
Okay.
teaching class, and so these may be updated in command. I didn't grab these from command, so that may be on me. Do know that the seller property condition disclosure form, if the sellers don't provide it at closing, they do have a $500 obligation to the buyers, not $300. It used to be $300. It's changed to $500.
It is updated. I've used it and it says 500.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this is, unfortunately, you're getting my my old forms on here. I will make sure that they are cleared from my documents folder and new ones replaced for the next time we have this conversation. And then, of course, the same conversation about how premises are going to be conveyed by a warranty deed, and then the contract of sale to be signed on or before blank. Typically, that's about a week to 2 weeks. Right, in a faster moving market, you want it way sooner, so 5 to 7 days. In a more normalized market, anywhere from 7 to 10 business days is pretty typical. Right, and that's assuming that this is going to be signed and then utilized as an agreement, as an outline for the seller's attorney to write a full-blown contract on and send to the buyer's attorney. Here's what's interesting about this document. Notice paragraph 4. It says this agreement to remain in full force and effect and constitute a valid contract between the parties. So what does that mean? Well, it either means everything or it means nothing. It depends on who you talk to and the day you talk to them. There are a bunch of attorneys who have decided that even though this says it's a valid contract and will be full force and effect, that it doesn't much matter, and they can get the clients out. I don't have an opinion about its validity or its enforceability, because there is many different opinions about that, as there are attorneys to represent buyers and sellers. And so what I would say to you is, when your buyers are signing it, make sure they know that they're signing something that at least the words on the page say it's a valid contract and it's fully enforceable. So they shouldn't sign it nonchalantly. If they want to get their advice, the advice of their attorney before they sign it, you can certainly arrange for them to do that. But the words do say it's a fully valid and enforceable contract. Whether or not attorneys decide to make it something different is on them. And then the seller is going to sign on the left and the buyer is going to sign on the right, including putting the information with the agents and the attorneys at the bottom. That is that form in a quick nutshell. Questions on it? All the same information, just outlined a little differently. Go ahead.
So this 2-page form is used typically where?
So the 2-page purchase agreement is typically used along the coast in Fairfield County, not in Greenwich. So from Stamford kind of up the line. It is sometimes used as you get a little bit further north, but mostly as soon as you're away from the coastal towns and into towns like Wilton, Weston, Easton, right? That mid Fairfield County tier, you're really switching over from, well, it depends, right? So you're using this form and you're also using the 1-page offer to purchase form that Northern Fairfield County oftentimes uses. But again, so much of this is changing because so many people are shifting to documents that feel like they have a little bit more teeth in them. So generally speaking, in Fairfield County, you have the southern tier using this form more often and the northern tier using the 1-page offer to purchase form more often. The rest of the state, the 4-page contract. The eastern part of Fairfield County, the 4-page contract. Greenwich, a letter of intent, more like a memorandum of intent, kind of like the way New York does things, right? So we're gonna blindfold you, spin you around, and then have you throw a dart. And that's how you know what form you use, because it's now. Here's what's cool: all of them are valid, right? The issue is kind of knowing where you're buying or where you're helping someone purchase, and using a form that, again, the listing agent and the seller will be familiar with, so that you're not introducing something new and unique and in some people's mind a little weird, right, into the transaction. You don't want to distract the seller with a form. Or if you do use a form and the listing agent turns around and says, you know what, if you could please present that on this form, that would be helpful. I know people who argue against that. You know what, I get to use whatever form I want. I'm not sure why you would do that, right? If the listing agent is advising you to go and use a different form, just go and use the other form. Right?
Would you ask them?
That's what they're used to, and that's what they're used to discussing with their sellers. So just go ahead and use the form that makes the best sense for them. You certainly could ask them, Ronnie.
Yeah.
Right? If there's a specific form they want used. Knowing the pockets of what's used where is really helpful, because then you can make a pretty good guess. Yes, Dave.
Is it a practice of just asking the listing agent what they prefer, or no?
Well, you certainly could do that.
Okay.
Again, I think knowing the pockets of where you're doing business, Northern Fairfield County, typically the offer to purchase, Southern Fairfield County purchase agreement, Eastern Fairfield County 4-page contract, and then the rest of the state 4-page contract. And as I said before, agents in Fairfield County, I think we're never going back to not utilizing the 4-page contract. So I have a feeling that over the next year or two, we're going to have more 4-page contracts used in Fairfield County than we ever have before, and it's going to start to look like the state is going to go in that direction. I personally start to see the purchase agreement and the offer to purchase start to phase themselves out. We'll see if I'm right, but that's what I'm looking at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Donna, did you have a question?
Me? No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Did I raise my hand? I'm sorry.
No, you were unmuted, and I couldn't see anybody because I'm
Sorry,
sharing
yeah.
my screen.
Wasn't
Yeah.
intentional, sorry.
Anybody else? Okay. So let me stop I will show you the offer to purchase real quick. I know we're running a little bit behind. Seems to be the story of my life lately. So I do want to show you this one document, however. Share screen. Here we go. Zippity doo dah. So here's the offer to purchase. Again, it's a 1-page little outline. It's kind of an agreement to agree, right? You can see buyer and seller, subject property, the MLS number, following inclusions, no exclusions, but you can always write them in. The struggle with this, it fascinates me because frankly, the first, I don't know, 15 years of my career or so, I think the only document I ever used was this, right? Until I started to see the other forms that were used throughout the state. And so for those of you who have always used this, it's just kind of natural. For those of you who have used something else, you look at this and you think, how can I ever get all the information I need to put in this offer on this one little tiny page? There's no place to write. It's limited. Well, yes, it is all of those things. And yet we've managed to do business in Northern Fairfield County using this form for decades.
Is
Doesn't
that
mean
the
it's-
binder? Is that what's
Sure.
known as a binder? Okay.
Sure, yeah, you can call it that. The offer to purchase, the binder form, kind of synonymous. You can see that the terms and conditions are very similar to what I just outlined for you. Sale price, 1%, balance of deposit, mortgage, and then the rest of the cash at closing, right? So that's how that breaks down, those lines 1 through 5. Very similar to what we just looked at the purchase agreement, except that the mortgage and the remaining balance are switched. 4 and 5 are switched. Lines 4 and 5 are switched. You then have a mortgage contingency date, which gets put in there in the middle of that paragraph right there. This line here, the offer will expire at midnight. You can use to your advantage if you want a faster answer, right? Inspections, again, you have little check boxes. You have they're going to happen within blank calendar days of acceptance. So you have again, all these similar ideas, just in a slightly different format. Property condition disclosure form is here, and yes, the one that's on the you can see mine is still old because again, I took all these from my own stash. This is not a contract of sale. So here's the biggest change here, that this document says right there, nope, if you're looking for a contract, look elsewhere, not me. I'm not that. Does that mean that people still can't sue if they want to try and enforce this? Well, we've had that happen a couple of times in the last couple of years. Even though it says it's not a contract of sale, buyers decide that everyone signed it and so it needs to be enforced, right? So what I would say to you is, if people ask you what's enforceable, what's a contract, I think what you have to tell them is, look, the intent of these forms is X, Y, and Z. The intent of this binder, this offer to purchase, is that it is a non-binding outline. It's an agreement to agree that then gets sent to the attorneys to sign contracts. Does that mean that there have not been buyers who have attempted to hold sellers to what they agreed to in this document, even though it says it's not a contract of sale? They have. Does that mean that the purchase agreement, that paragraph 4 on page 2 is binding, is not binding? It depends, right? So I think you have to help people understand that, look, regardless of what document you use, someone can always decide to interpret it differently, right? So let's be less concerned about the document, more concerned about the offer and what kind of outs you have, right? If that's what they're concerned about. Closing of sale to be on or before blank. The parties represent that blank. So you're listing the real estate brokerages, right? So it's Keller Williams Realty and Coldwell Banker are the sole real estate brokers representing the buyer and the seller. And then you have a couple of little check boxes to see if the lead disclosure, the property disclosure are attached. If it's dual agency, what that might be attached. You then have a very itty bitty tiny little spot down at the bottom for other contingencies. So if you write really small, you can get that in there. If you write really big, you're kind of screwed. You may have to put an asterisk and type it and put it on a separate piece of paper with initial lines for them to go ahead and initial. And then you see I have the signature page lines at the bottom. Questions on this little form?
Yeah, I have one where it says initial deposit submitted by, is that Chris Ferguson or buyer's agent, or what goes on that line?
Yeah, so the intent originally for that line was like on the purchase agreement where you're delivering the check to. So it's really the trustee. So what I would put there is the buyer's attorney's name. The initial deposit is submitted to and acknowledged by Maria Smith, attorney at law, or Maria Smith as trustee. The whole idea of that line, Chris, is so that if someone looks at this piece of paper, they can determine where the money is. So you have to kind of just direct them to the money.
I put my name there last time.
Woohoo! Do you have the money? Right, and so in the future, I would just utilize the buyer's attorney, right? Because it can be acknowledged by you. Your name would make sense, would make more sense if it was acknowledged by only, but since we're no longer submitting it, right, that really needs to now shift to the buyer's attorney for the because that's where it's being deposited. Yes, Donna.
I just wanted to add, because 2.5 years ago, I had only ever used the 2-page, and now I use all of them because of the territories that I work in. And I don't know if you share this experience, Rick, but I find this one, the 1-page one, is the one that I tend to read the most carefully, because it seems to be very proprietary from brokerage to brokerage to brokerage. They like to change this form more than others. So this one, I can't go, oh, it's the 1-page again. Oh, here we go. But I know what this, I have to take the time to really read this one. And I found some interesting changes in there that I know I've called you on, I've called attorneys on to say, what does that mean? So this one can sometimes trick you up, even though it seems like it's the simplest one.
Yeah, great point. And so the idea of, I think what's occurred over time is that especially brokerages in Northern Fairfield County who wanted their own kind of version of this, instead of looking at the 2-page purchase agreement as an expansion of what they had or a customization, or starting to teach the 4-page standard form contract, they went with an altered or revised proprietary version of the single 1-pager, right? And there are a couple I know of, like the Ravis one of this, if I'm not mistaken, actually has language inserted it right into the middle of the document, just like the 2-page purchase agreement that says, please note, right, until or unless replaced or superseded by an actual contract written by the attorneys, this will constitute said contract. And so Don is right. You do have to make sure that you're reading, when you're on the listing side and you're receiving these documents, be certain that you know what it is the sellers may be signing, because they all are a little bit different. It'd be nice if it was all just standard and we got rid of some of these other ones. Frankly, I would, in my world, I'm a big proponent of, let's just all go to a contract go to the 4-page contract and get rid of the other ones. That's just me, because that would be standardized, and then we could teach one thing one time and everyone would just understand it, right? Instead of this whole hodgepodge of here's how we do it differently because I drove 20 minutes down the road, right? Okay. Any
And-
questions on the
You know, I have
three?
a question. No, on this offer to, this one page, where did you
Yep.
say this is most, because you were giving the counties or not the counties.
Northern
but you were giving
Northern
counties.
Fairfield County.
This is the most used?
In Northern Fairfield County, like greater Danbury-ish, I would say.
Okay. Thanks.
Right, and again, remember that the last 2 years has changed a lot of who's using what,
True, true,
right?
true. And you know,
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
I would, and because because my territory does sometimes it touches right up to where you would think they've switched to a different form because I'm in the next town, so to speak. Like Southbury is a very interesting, and so I do normally ask the agent, if I were to pick one of these many forms, which one would please you the most? And I have actually said it just like that, because they may not be a New Haven County agent. They just happen to have a listing there. Or the seller's attorney is from Greenwich, so there's all these mixing and matching. So I just ask.
Yeah, it's like you spin the wheel of forms.
Right.
Where it stops, nobody knows. Debbie Orr.
As you said, this is changing and transition constantly. I had a situation recently where we had 4 offers before we were able to get to the one that was acceptable for a seller. And the first 3 offers, actually, we ended up, I think, with 5. The first 3 offers were on the 4-page form. The 4th offer was on an offer to purchase. This is in Danbury. And the seller said, why didn't they put it on the normal form?
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, that agent wouldn't do it because she was kind of an old dog. And she said, but I never do it that way. Okay, she didn't get the house.
Yeah.
Seller choice. Yeah.
Great point. And so that's interesting because, you know, what does the sellers know, right? Sellers don't necessarily know one from the other from the next. When Debbie got 4 offers and 3 of them were on one form, even though one could say, and maybe one can't say this any longer, but one could say that the standard-ish form for the Danbury area had been the 1-page offer to purchase. Now it almost doesn't matter if that's true or not, because the sellers received 3 of one kind and the 4th on something that seemed subpar, right? It seemed a little inferior. It's like, oh, here's all these contracts, and here, like, what's this? It's like written on a napkin. Like, what's the point? And so it's interesting. That's an interesting point about perception of our sellers. Then it's even more fascinating to me that when you went back and said, please put it on a different form, that person said no. Maybe they had the best offer, and that person, because they either didn't know how and weren't willing to ask a question about how, or was just stubborn, or maybe a little bit of both, potentially cost the buyers they were supposed to be advocating for, remember fiduciary representation, at least the chance at a property. Fascinating. All righty. Any other questions on all these little forms? Okay, so it is 2:25. I know there are people here who are looking for buyer agreement stuff. There are people here who are looking for cat house stories. And so here is what we are going to do. And I made this decision about 25 minutes ago at 2 o'clock, and here's how I am going to, before I go to bed tonight, find the 2 videos that take care of the stuff that I thought we would get to today. because we spent an hour and 25 minutes on these documents. For those of you who are looking for clarification on these documents, I hope that was helpful. For those of you who are looking for the other stuff that I thought we would get to today, I apologize for that. And the good news is I just have to find the link. I will even search through each link and give you the exact start point of the here's how we take the buyer agreement and we take the script from the buyer consult and overlay them. Those videos also include Q&A, right, from people. So you'll have questions that will be asked of you or asked of me that I can answer. And if you have anything else that you're unsure about, just watch those and shoot me a quick email or a text, and I'm happy to answer the question. And I will also find the last cat house story. And again, I'll fast forward and give you the exact number you go to. You can watch that cat house story. So instead of live, I will look for our video recording to take care of that for me. However, it will be just as fulfilling, I promise you that. With that, I am going to wish you a good afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, bright and early, if not before. And again, if you have any other questions, just feel free to shoot them to me via text or email, and I'll get those answers to ASAP. Have a lovely.
Thanks, Rick.
Sure thing. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.